The lamp's light had grown very dim by the time I stopped writing, its little flame trembling in the soft breeze that slipped under our sitting-room door. London at that late hour felt very quiet, like the whole city was holding its breath. Holmes was not really sleeping. Even though he was resting on the sofa with his eyes shut, I could tell because his fingertips were moving slightly. The coal fire had burned down to glowing ashes. Even the street outside was strangely silent. Then came the knock. It was not a soft tap from someone being polite, nor was it a loud bang from someone in a panic. It was firm, steady, and it came again and again, like the person knew he would be let in sooner or later. Holmes opened his eyes at exactly the same moment the third knock sounded, as if the rhythm had pulled him from his thoughts. Before I could even stand up, he was already on his feet, his dressing gown moving like a shadow that had decided to sup away from the wall. And so began the very strange story of the stranger who, on that cold night, knocked on every single door from the Strand all the way to Baker Street before finally picking ours. I am telling it now, dear reader, exactly as it happened, for you have always paid such close attention to our adventures. And if there was ever a case to reward someone who pays attention, it is this one. Its secret slipped through London like a hidden breeze, and what we discovered touched on things I could barely believe were real. I have often thought about the odd quiet that sometimes fills Baker Street at the strangest times, as if the noise of the day has been sucked away, leaving only the bare bones of the city in the dim gaslight. It was in such a silence that this case started, on a night that was not stormy or nice, just cold and sharp. As if even the stones were tired of winter, I had been writing some notes about one of Holmes's earlier cases, which involved an experiment with silver nitrate and a policeman's glove that met a bad end. When the first knock broke the quiet, it was clear and measured, not loud, yet it held a strange urgency that came right through the wood. Holmes stirred from his spot on the sofa, though I doubted he had been truly asleep. His eyes opened with the careful look of a man noticing something he has been waiting for. "You heard it, Watson," he said quietly before I could say a word. His voice had that slight eagerness that only a new puzzle could bring. The second knock came before either of us moved, perfectly timed after the first, as if the visitor was setting a specific rhythm. By the third knock, Holmes was already gliding toward the door, his steps quiet on the old carpet, but full of purpose when he opened it. The gaslight from our room spilled out to show a single person standing on our step. The man was of average height, wearing a plain dark coat whose bottom edge was dusty. His hat was gripped in both hands, squeezed so hard the felt was crushed. What caught my attention, however, was not his clothes or how he stood, but the look on his face. He had a look of tired calm that was so complete it seemed almost unnatural, as if terror had worn itself out and left only a hollow shell. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked. His voice was steady, but so quiet it was barely louder than the draft. "And Dr. Watson, I assume?" Holmes gave a small nod. "You assume correctly. Please, come inside. You look frozen." The man stepped over our threshold with clear hesitation, his eyes scanning the room as if checking it matched something he imagined. Holmes watched him with a focus that was subtle but full of sharp observation. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his mind. Once the door was shut, our visitor sank into the closest armchair, putting his crumpled hat on his knee. "I have come," he began, "because I had nowhere else left. I have knocked on every door." I looked at Holmes, who folded his arms and looked at the man with one eyebrow slightly raised. "Every door in London would be quite a task," Holmes said. "Perhaps you could be more specific." The man let out a thin, shaky breath. from the Strand to here, door after door, house after house. I don't know what made me do it. Only that I had to keep moving, and at each one I knocked, though I never waited long enough for an answer. Until this one. That is a very odd way to look for help, I remarked. You must have passed several policemen. I did, he said, his eyes looking down. But I did not dare speak to any of them. Holmes leaned forward, putting his fingertips together under his chin. You speak like a man being followed. By whom? The visitor paused. It was not the pause of someone deciding what to say, but of someone trying to find the shape of a truth he himself did not yet understand. I cannot say, he whispered, only that something follows me. Not quite a person, and not an animal. Something, I know how this sounds. Something that has been walking behind me since sunset. I watched him closely. His hands trembled slightly on his hat, but the shaking was uneven, as if some deeper battle was happening inside him. Holmes, I could see, was studying not just the man's words, but the silence between them. You have no name for this thing that follows you? Holmes asked. None that I dare say out loud. Then tell us your own name. The man sat up straighter with clear effort. My name is Elias Hartwell. I lived in a rented room near the Strand. And you left it this evening? Yes, because of what was in the room with me. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me, his eyes bright with a spark I knew from countless cases, the mix of deep interest and suspicion that meant he was fully engaged. Describe what was in the room, he said. Hartwell clasped his hands together as if to hold himself steady. I did not see it. I only felt its presence. A pressure, Doctor, a weight in the air, and then he pressed a hand to his forehead. I ran. I knocked on the first door I saw, though I could not make myself wait for it to open, and then the next, and the next, until I reached yours. Holmes took a few short steps back and forth in front of the fireplace, his dressing gown trailing behind him like a dark wing. When he spoke, his calm tone hid his growing fascination. You say you knocked at every door. Did you notice anything unusual about the path you took? The pattern of the houses? The order of your steps? Hartwell shook his head. No. I just walked where my fear took me. But fear, Mr. Hartwell, is rarely without direction, Holmes replied. Even panic leaves a pattern. Hartwell opened his mouth, closed it again, and seemed to shrink into himself. A sudden weariness washed over him, making him look 10 years older. Mr. Holmes, he murmured, I did not come to London to be hunted. I came to forget, to disappear into the crowds. But it seems what I ran from has found me anyway. Holmes stopped pacing. You ran from something. Where from? From Kent, Hartwell said in a strained whisper. From something I wanted never to remember. What thing? Hartwell's gaze moved to the fireplace, where the embers were now just a faint, pulsing red. A death, he said. One I may have caused. A heavy silence followed those words. I felt it settle over us like fine soot drifting from the chimney. Holmes looked at Hartwell with renewed intensity. May have caused? I repeated. Surely such a thing is either certain or it is not. I do not know, Hartwell breathed. Sometimes I believe it completely. At other times, his voice broke. At other times, I think I have gone mad. Holmes began pacing again, his steps now full of restless energy. Watson, he said, our guest is in no state for more questions tonight. We must be gentle. Hartwell looked up sharply. I can go if— Nonsense. Holmes interrupted with a rare kindness. You are safer here than anywhere else in London. Watson will get the spare room ready. I move to do so. though I could not shake the creepy feeling that Hartwell's shadow, stretched long across the carpet by the lamplight, seemed wrong. It was not just long from the angle of the light, but somehow stretched by something deeper, as if the darkness itself was straining to stay attached to him. Before I left the room, Holmes caught my sleeve and whispered, "Look at his boots before he goes to bed." I did so. There was street mud on them, but there was something else too. A faint mark along the sole, not a crack or normal wear, but more like a narrow dent made by something sharp, hitting the same spot again and again. Holmes crouched to look at it. "Interesting," he murmured, tracing the line with a finger. "Most interesting." Hartwell was too tired to notice when he finally got up to follow me to the spare room. His movements were slow, almost mechanical. Yet when he reached the doorway, he stopped and turned back to Holmes. "Will it find me here?" he asked. Holmes met his gaze. "Nothing will find you while you are under my roof." Only when Hartwell was gone down the hall did Holmes let his expression change. A flicker of worry crossed his face, so fast that anyone who didn't know him would have missed it. A man knocking on every door from the Strand to Baker Street. Holmes said softly, and not one policeman crossed his path. "Watson, we must walk those streets before dawn touches them." Something drove him here with a method hidden in its madness. He went to the window and lifted the curtain just enough to look out. The street was empty, quiet, undisturbed. Yet Holmes stayed there, his posture tense. "What is it?" I asked. He let the curtain fall and stepped back. "For a moment," he murmured, "I thought I saw someone standing under the lamppost across the street, but when I looked straight at it, the space was empty." A chill went through me. One I did not invite. Holmes put out the lamp, plunging the room into a deep gloom lit only by the weak glow of the last embers. Outside, the gaslight flickered once before burning steadily again. Holmes stood perfectly still, listening to something only he could hear. I felt the smallest prickle on the back of my neck, as if the air itself had changed. "Watson," he said quietly, "our case has already begun." The bed of embers died. Somewhere down the hall, the floorboards creaked under Hartwell's unsteady steps, and in that dim, breathless moment, I could not shake the strange feeling that just out of our sight, something else was walking the street too. We left Baker Street while the city still had the hushed, secret feel of the very early morning. The street lamps, those gaslit guards that give London its night face, burned with a steadiness that seems to watch only those who move beneath them. Hartwell had drunk a mug of tea and was sleeping fitfully in the spare room. He was so exhausted he did not object when Holmes suggested we retrace the route he said he had taken. There are times, I have noticed, when the simplest action walking a path, retracing steps, can crack a case open as easily as the most clever plan. Holmes, with that quick, purposeful energy he gets when a problem fully grabs him, wrapped his cloak around his shoulders and said we should start at the lodgings near the Strand where Hartwell had stayed, and then follow the line of doors he claimed to have tried. The Strand itself was wide and ghostly, shop windows lined up like sleeping soldiers, and the river beyond moving with its usual uncaring flow. The air carried a faint smell of the Thames and the sharper scent of cold smoke. Once, a carriage clattered past carefully, disturbing nothing but its own echo. Holmes led the way, his walk efficient and instinctive, his eyes scanning the pavement not for faces, but for impressions. I followed, my notebook put away, for there are times when just watching is not enough. We reached the lodging house to find the landlady, a middle-aged woman with a face stuck in a permanent frown. As if smiling cost her too much, she let us in after little convincing. for she had noticed the earlier disturbance when Hartwell had rushed out. The curiosity of many in London is easily stirred by anything that breaks the routine. The room Hartwell had used was at the back. Small and plain, with a bed, a chair, a narrow dressing table, and a window looking onto a courtyard where a single gas lamp threw a weak circle of light. The chair showed he had sat there recently. The bedsheets were still messy, and on the table was a small Bible, its edges worn from frequent reading. There was nothing in the room to show violence, no knocked-over furniture, no sign that another person had been there in any normal way. Holmes moved with that special patient hurry that is unique to him, touching the window frame, lifting the edge of the rug, pressing a finger to the dampness on the windowsill from condensation. "He left in a hurry," he murmured, but not without thought. "What do you mean?" asked the landlady, who was watching him with an uneasy mix of dislike and curiosity. "Look at the sole of the boot by the bed," said Holmes. "The mud on it is the same as in the back courtyard, yet there's hardly a speck on the room's threshold itself. Our gentleman stepped through this room as if he wanted to leave nothing behind." She stared, and for a moment I thought she might protest that she hadn't noticed. But she just folded her hands tighter and led us back into the courtyard. There, under the weak halo of the single lamp, the pavement was damp and marked by a set of footprints that at first seemed like nothing more than ordinary scuff marks from evening traffic. Holmes bent to the ground and ran his fingers along the series of dents in the wet ground. He moved with a deliberate carefulness that always impressed me. "See here, Watson," he said softly. "The spacing is uneven. The steps are of different lengths. There is a hitch in the rhythm." I leaned closer. The prints were shallow, as if the walker had been shuffling his feet. And yet on the outer edge of several prints there was a thin, clean cut, like the mark of a small metal wedge. In some spots the dent was deeper. As if the sole had hit a small stone each time, Holmes stood up. Hartwell said he knocked at every door as he ran. But these marks tell another story. Someone walked deliberately here, and limped in a way I don't think was just from being tired. We followed the line of footprints back toward the Strand, then across into an alley where the gaslight had gone out and the shadows pooled like ink. The footprints continued, skirting the gutters, sometimes going up to doorways and sometimes veering away as if avoiding them rather than instinctively seeking them. At one house, the prints stopped completely and then started again on the other side of the doorway, as if the man had darted around the corner instead of going up to the porch. At another, they were joined by the faint mark of a small wheel, as if a cart or handcart had brushed near him. As we walked, Holmes talked in a low stream, more to organize his own thoughts than to instruct me. "Fear does not walk in a straight line, Watson. It stitches itself into messy patterns, but there is a will behind these movements. See how he avoids certain houses, those with brass knockers, and goes for those with plain knocker plates. He is not looking for shelter so much as for discretion." Discretion from what? Holmes did not answer right away. He had stopped at a lamppost and was peering at a line of wet stones where the prints got faint. "From a follower of a different sort," he said at last. "Notice also the change in pressure. Here the step is light, there it is heavy." He stepped up, stepped down, hesitated. That is not the record of a man running blindly. It is the record of a man who thinks he is being guided. We followed the prints until they reached the corner of a narrow passage leading toward Marylebone, where the street lamps were spaced farther apart. Here the prints became wider. The distance between each one lengthened into a regular pace, and on one stone I saw, so faint anyone but Holmes would have missed it, a smear of something dark pressed into the grain. He pried at it with the tip of his pocket-knife until a tiny flake came off, showing a paler color underneath. "A pigment," he announced, "a red color mixed with soot. Not common on these streets." He thought about this for a moment. As if gathering many invisible threads into one, the man has been near industrial smoke. And yet his coat has dust from the coast. He has been driven by fear, true. But there is a path here, older than his panic. A path of planning. We followed the trail as far as the lamplight would let us, noting how each print was different. How some bore the mark of a heel broken at the same spot we had seen on Hartwell's boots. When the prints grew faint and the street widened into a main road where the noise of wagons and people would have covered any subtle marks. Holmes paused. "Watson," he said in a tone that was not just a statement but an invitation. "Look at the direction. He did not come here to hide. He came here to be seen by a certain kind of house, one that opens without question to those who seek it, yet stays close to the outside world. What kind of house is that?" I asked. "A place where you knock and are not answered by a human voice," Holmes replied, his eyes moving to the shadowed front of a building across the way. "A place where a door opens because it must, not because it is invited. We shall look at it at dawn." As the night went on, we followed the footprints into alleys that narrowed until they seemed to swallow the light. Once, under a lamp that shook in a draught, Holmes stopped and listened. There was then the faintest sound, hardly more than a whisper on the air, the creak of hinges, a footstep in the distance, the long sigh of a curtain stirring inside. He turned his head toward the sound as if he had expected it, and for a brief second his eyes shone with a resolve that was both eager and serious. "What is it?" I asked, feeling a worry I could not explain. He did not reply at first. Instead, he knelt and pressed his hand to a fresh mark on the pavement, as if to test its warmth. "Footprints often show the nature of the person who made them," he said finally. "But there are impressions we cannot see, the ones a human mind leaves on another. We must find both if we are to understand why this man knocked on every door." We left the alley with damp boots and the knowledge that the path did not end with Hartwell's arrival at Baker Street. The footprints had become their own language, telling in a shorthand of wear and pressure a story Hartwell himself had not yet spoken. Holmes had collected these small truths with the focus of a man who knows that the weight of a case often rests on what others ignore. When we got back to Baker Street, the sky was starting to show the first hint of dawn in the east, that pale promise that signals the city's waking. Hartwell was still asleep, his face smoothed by exhaustion. Holmes, however, had not slept. He stood by the window, hands behind his back, watching the street begin its slow preparations for day. "Footprints," he said simply as I entered the room. "They speak in the lamplight, Watson. They tell us the speed of a man and the weight of his fear. We must now learn who walked beside him, and whether that companion was among the living or of some other kind." Outside, the first lamps sputtered and died before the steadying touch of morning, and for a moment the street was neither fully dark nor fully lit, a threshold between two states. Holmes's figure was black against the pale light creeping into the sky, and I felt the strangeness of our situation. Two men, a tired stranger, and a set of clues traced on wet stone, all leading toward some revelation we had not yet seen. We got ready to follow the trail further when the landlady tapped at the door and said in a voice thin from sleep that a policeman had come to the front. Asking about disturbances, Holmes's face tightened for a second at the news. "Let him come," he said. "If the street wants to be part of our story, let it speak." He took his hat with a decisiveness that seemed to seal a promise. Outside, the lamps hummed, and in that soft, uneasy hour before the city put on its full daytime clothes, I wondered which of the many doors around London's heart would be the next to give up its secret. The policeman who came that morning was a young man with a face too eager for the early hour and a helmet tilted at a risky angle. He introduced himself as Constable Hargreaves and said, with many apologies for bothering us, that a neighbor had reported seeing a strange person hanging around near our building in the night. Holmes looked at him closely, for he was never overly fond of police getting involved unless the matter was already under control. Still, he listened patiently as Hargreaves described a man of medium height who had stood uncertainly under the lamppost opposite, staring up at our windows as if expecting someone to come down at any moment. When approached, the figure had turned sharply into the fog and vanished without a trace. The young policeman had thought little of it until the person next door reported hearing a knocking steady, deliberate, and unnatural on the shutters. "And did the sound stop when you came to look?" Holmes asked. Hargreaves nodded as if he had been waiting for us to ask. "It stopped the very moment I turned the corner, sir. As if whatever made it knew I was there." That detail stirred something in Holmes. I saw it in the slight narrowing of his eyes. He politely sent the young policeman away, promising to tell Scotland Yard if anything else happened, and then turned immediately to the spare room where Hartwell was. The man had slept poorly, his breathing shallow, his face tense even in unconsciousness. He woke with a start when Holmes put a hand on his shoulder, and for a moment confusion clouded his eyes, as if he did not know where he was or why he was there. "You're in Baker Street," Holmes reminded him calmly. "You came here for safety last night. Tell me, do you remember enough to go on?" Hartwell sat up slowly, pressing his hands to his temples. The morning light slanted across the bed, showing a paleness to his skin that had not been there the night before. "I remember coming," he murmured, "and I remember leaving my lodgings. But what made me do it, Mr. Holmes? I fear it is beyond reason." Holmes gestured for him to come into the sitting room. Hartwell obeyed, moving stiffly, showing both physical and mental strain. The morning had brought Baker Street its usual energy. Carriages clattered past now and then, and the calls of street sellers floated up faintly from below. Yet our rooms felt oddly cut off from all that activity, as if the events of the previous night had drawn a curtain between us and the rest of London. "Start from the moment you left Kent," Holmes said. Sitting opposite him, "You mentioned a death you may have caused. Explain." Hartwell's hands tightened around the teacup I put in front of him. "Though he did not drink, it was 3 months ago," he said. "I worked as a clerk for a Mr. Lawrence Pelham, a lawyer of some standing. His house was near the edge of Rochester, next to some woods. He was a lonely man, proud of his library and prone to fits of sadness. I had served him faithfully for nearly 2 years. Then one night he was found dead in his study." Holmes leaned forward just enough to show his interest. "Found dead by whom?" "By me," Hartwell whispered. I had gone to bring him some letters he had asked for when I opened the study door. He was sitting at his desk, his head bowed, his hand frozen around a pen. The ink had spilled, making a black pool on the paper. At first I thought he was asleep, but the unnatural stillness, the stiffness, it said otherwise. "And how?" Holmes asked, his voice soft but insistent. "Do you think this makes you responsible?" Hartwell lifted his gaze, and in his eyes I saw that same tired calm from the night before, a calm born not of peace, but of a struggle so fierce it had left no expression. "Because," he answered, "the night before he died, he said to me, 'If anything happens to me, Hartwell, The blame will rest with you." Holmes did not react outwardly, but I felt a small shiver go through me. Such a statement, mysterious and half-threatening, did not fit the character of a quiet lawyer. What did he mean by that? Hartwell shook his head. "I do not know." He had been troubled for weeks. He shut himself in the study for hours, writing feverishly, then burning the pages. Once I saw a sheet he had not yet destroyed. It had a list of names. Names I did not know. Holmes stood up abruptly, crossed the room, and got the ledger we had found the previous night. "Like these?" Hartwell's breath caught. "Where did you find that?" "Never mind that. Do the names look like what Pelham wrote?" Hartwell took the ledger, his hands shaking. "Yes, yes. The order is the same. The notes, the initials next to each name, they match his system. But how? How can this be?" "That," Holmes said, "is exactly what we will find out." Hartwell closed the ledger, his fingers lingering on the cover as if he feared the guilt of touching it. "There is more," he whispered. "The morning after Mr. Pelham's death, I left Kent. No one suspected me, not openly, but I felt the weight of his last words. And then, 2 nights after getting to London, I woke up feeling that someone was standing in my room. But when I lit the lamp, there was no one, only the faint impression of a shape on the floorboards, as if a shadow had grown solid enough to leave a mark." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "A shadow?" "Don't ask me to explain it. I cannot, but I know what I felt. Mr. Holmes, and from that moment, I have sensed something following me, watching me. Last night, it became unbearable. That was when I ran. That was when I knocked on every door." Holmes started pacing again, a sure sign he was putting the pieces together faster than he wanted to show. "Your employer," he said slowly, "was he a man with ordinary connections?" "No," Hartwell said at once. "That is, he had dealings I did not fully understand. Visitors who came after dark. Letters with crests from families far above his station. He kept another key, a brass one, fancy, which opened a drawer I never saw." As he spoke, the color drained completely from his face. He put the cup on the table with a hand that shook so badly it rattled the saucer. Holmes watched this with a thoughtful calculation. "You want to confess something," Holmes said, "but you cannot." Hartwell closed his eyes, pain moving across his face like a shadow on water. "I have tried," he whispered. "For weeks I have tried. Every time I try to speak the full truth, some force presses on my mind, a weight, a pressure, as if my thoughts are being held back by an unseen hand." Holmes crouched in front of him, studying him not as a doctor studies a patient, but as a scientist studies a flame that behaves against its nature. "You are under strain," he said gently, "but you are rational. Nothing supernatural is at work here." Hartwell's eyes snapped open. "But you did not feel what I felt in that room. You did not hear the sound." "What sound?" Holmes asked. "A single knock," Hartwell said. "Slow, heavy, as if struck on the air itself. Not on the door. When I turned, Mr. Holmes, there was nothing. The room fell silent. Outside, a carriage thundered past, making the window panes shake. Holmes stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. "We go to Kent," he said. Hartwell flinched. "I cannot go back there." "You must," Holmes replied. "The truth of Pelham's death is there, and whatever is haunting your mind or your footsteps started in that house." He moved to get his coat. As he lifted it, a small envelope slid from the inside pocket. I saw him catch it with a movement almost too fast to see. He stared at it for a moment before turning it over. It was sealed, with no address. its wax stamp marked with an unfamiliar crest, a coiled snake circling a key. Where did this come from? I asked. Holmes did not answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the door, as if he expected someone or something to be standing there. It was in Hartwell's coat, he said finally, though I am quite sure he does not know it is there. Hartwell shook his head violently. I swear on my life, I have never seen that envelope. Holmes put it into his pocket. Then rest assured, it holds the truth you cannot speak. Before either of us could respond, a sudden noise cut through the house. 3 sharp knocks, heavy, deliberate, echoing through the walls. Hartwell gasped, white as chalk. Holmes spun toward the hallway. The knocking stopped after the 3rd knock. No footsteps followed. Holmes moved first. Crossing the room in 3 quick strides, he threw open the sitting-room door. The hallway was empty. The front door was closed. Yet on the floor in front of it lay a single sheet of paper. Folded neatly into thirds, Holmes stooped, picked it up, and unfolded it. In stiff, clear handwriting were 4 words. Asterisk, do not open it. Asterisk, the gaslight trembled. Holmes did not, but a shadow no natural shadow seemed to draw itself along the floorboards behind him, thin as a thread and dark as spilled ink. And in that moment, I understood that our case had not just gotten deeper, it had awakened. The paper with its short warning lay on the table between us like an object pulled from some forbidden sea. Holmes did not touch it again for several minutes. He just stood in front of the fireplace with his hands behind his back, staring into the embers as if the shifting glow might rearrange itself into an answer. Hartwell sat rigidly in the armchair, trembling with a fear he no longer tried to hide. I found myself listening to the smallest sounds of the house, the ticking clock, the creak of the settling floorboards, as if another knock or whisper might leap from them at any moment. It felt absurdly as if the very air of Baker Street had grown tight, drawn thin like a violin string before the bow touches it. Finally Holmes turned, his face composed with that serious clarity he only has when a case has gone into depths where neither law nor reason easily travels. "Watson," he said, "we leave at once, Mr. Hartwell. You will come with us. There is no longer any question of what you fear, only of where it started." Hartwell tried to stand but swayed, gripping the edge of the chair. I do not want to go back to that house." "I cannot." Holmes stepped toward him, and though his words were firm, there was no harshness in them. "You fear what you do not understand. As long as it stays unseen, it controls you, but once brought into daylight, even the darkest truth loses its power." He held out a hand. After a faltering moment, Hartwell took it and let Holmes help him up. By noon, we were on a train rattling south toward Kent, the countryside rolling past the windows in a gray blur. Hartwell sat across from me, his gaze fixed on the speeding fields as if expecting shapes to rise from them. Holmes, meanwhile, studied the sealed envelope with the snake and key crest, never opening it, just turning it slowly between his fingers. At last he said, "This crest is not unknown to me. It belongs to a society of great age, quiet, discreet, rarely mentioned in official records. Their interests are varied, but the key always stands for access and the snake for secrecy." Hartwell's voice trembled. "You mean Mr. Pelham was involved with them?" "Not just involved," Holmes replied. "I suspect he worked for them. And I further suspect that his death, whether natural or planned, did not end the matter he was handling." "Then this envelope is either a message," Holmes finished, "or a trap." Hartwell shuddered again and looked away. I could not blame him. The weight of the unknown was pressing even on my own nerves. And Holmes's silence afterward only sharpened that edge. When we reached Rochester and got a carriage, the afternoon had grown cloudy, the sky a dull metal dome. We passed rows of modest houses and shops, their shutters half closed against a rising wind. The trees lining the town's edge bent in restless motion, as if expecting our arrival. Hartwell directed the driver to a narrow lane flanked by tall hedges, beyond which lay the Pelham estate. The house emerged from the gloom with the starkness of a memory forced into the present. It was an old structure of stone and wood, its windows long and narrow, its roof slightly bowed under years of weather. The shutters on the ground floor were closed, but one on the upper floor had come loose and flapped now and then. A chill seemed to hang over the property, not just from the season, but from something more basic, some leftover feeling from the death inside. Holmes sent the driver away and motioned us forward. The gate groaned on its hinges with a reluctant sound that made Hartwell stop mid-step. His breathing quickened. "Courage," Holmes said softly. "Your enemy is not the memory of this place, but what it hid." Hartwell nodded, though his steps stayed hesitant. As we neared the front door, Holmes paused and crouched, examining the doorstep with intense focus. "Footprints?" I asked. "Something like them." He traced a faint disturbance in the damp earth. "A weight has pressed here recently. Not a person or an animal, more as if something was dragged. Yet the lines are clean, unbroken, curious." He stood and put a hand on the door. What happened next was so fast I scarcely believed it at first. The door swung inward before Holmes applied even a bit of pressure. It did not creak. It did not resist. It gave way with an unnatural readiness, as if expecting our arrival. Hartwell staggered back with a choked cry. "The door is not locked," Holmes observed calmly. "That itself is notable, since the property is empty. Mr. Holmes," Hartwell whispered, "I swear to you, when I left this house, I locked it. I put the key under the mat outside, as arranged with the land agent. No one should be inside." Holmes stepped into the entry hall, and the air inside met us with a stillness so complete it felt like a presence itself. Dust lay on the floor in fine layers, undisturbed except for a single trail leading toward the study door. The very room where Pelham had died. "Do you see it, Watson?" Holmes murmured, "I do." The track was not the scuff of boots or the slide of furniture. It was a smooth line, narrow and straight, as if the floorboard themselves had shifted under something gliding across them. Holmes followed the line with quiet steps. Hartwell stayed at my side, trembling like a man half out of reality. We reached the study door, which stood slightly open. A faint draught came from the crack, carrying a smell of stale ink, old paper, and something else, something metallic, like the tang of a long-cooled tool. Holmes pushed the door wider. The room looked untouched. The desk where Pelham had sat was exactly as Hartwell had described. Papers arranged neatly, the blotter stained with ink. The chair pulled back slightly. The window shutters were closed, muting the day into a dim twilight, yet something felt wrong. Not in what we could see, but in what we could feel. As if some subtle change in the atmosphere had happened without the furniture moving at all. Holmes went to the desk and examined the ink blotter. Lifting it carefully, "This ink," he said, "was not spilled by accident. It was poured on purpose. Pelham meant to hide what was written underneath." Hartwell, shivering, replied, "He wrote a confession. Mr. Holmes, he said he would, but he burned every draft." "Every word burned," Holmes repeated. "Or hid." He lifted the blotter further. Under it, faint but unmistakable, was the imprint of writing pressed into the wood by a heavy hand. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Watson, paper and ink may perish, but pressure is far more faithful. He placed a sheet of thin paper over the impression and ran a soft pencil lightly over the surface. Slowly, the ghost of Pelham's final message began to appear. Asterisk, the door will open. Asterisk, asterisk, the key must not be taken. Asterisk, asterisk, if it finds him, all will be undone. Asterisk. Hartwell jerked back violently. The key, Mr. Holmes? That brass key I told you about. I do not have it, do I? I left it here, locked in the drawer. Holmes's gaze snapped to the writing desk. He opened the drawer. It was empty. A faint sound drifted down the hall. No louder than a breath, yet clear. A soft click. Like a latch turning, Hartwell clutched my arm. Holmes turned his head sharply. Something has moved in this house. He stepped into the hallway. The air there felt different, heavier, charged with an attention that belonged not to old wood, but to something watching. At the far end of the hall was a door leading to the cellar. It was closed. Holmes took a step toward it. The door opened silently. No hand touched it. No wind moved it. It opened as if acknowledging us. Holmes froze, his posture alert, measured, determined. "Watson," he said without turning, "stay with Hartwell. I am going down." But before he could take another step, something shifted at the bottom of the stairs. A shape, no more than a darkness within darkness, drew back, not running, but waiting. Holmes breathed in slowly. "So," he murmured, "we have been expected." The cellar swallowed the light beyond the first step. And yet the door stayed open, as if the house itself demanded we enter. Holmes went down one step, then another, and each footstep echoed not once, but twice, as if something else was descending with him. The echo that followed Holmes into the cellar was not the normal second sound you hear in enclosed spaces. It came a heartbeat after the first, deliberate and measured, like a companion choosing to follow rather than just reverberate. I stood with Hartwell at the top of the stairs, the open door yawning before us like an intake of breath, waiting to become something much worse. Hartwell held onto the banister, white as bleached paper, while Holmes's figure grew smaller in the gloom below. The lantern he carried cast a thin, trembling light, swallowed by the darkness just a few feet beyond him. When he finally disappeared from view, I felt the unnatural stillness of the house return, an oppressive hush, as if the walls were listening with far too much interest. Minutes passed, though whether 2 or 20 I could not say, for my awareness narrowed to the faint sounds drifting up from below. A scrape of wood, a shift of weight, then silence again. I could bear the waiting no longer. "Hartwell," I whispered, though speaking felt like a trespass. "Stay here. If Holmes calls, answer. If he does not, do nothing rash." "I cannot stay alone," Hartwell gasped. "Not here, not above that thing." But before I could reply, Holmes came back from the shadows, climbing the stairs with steady, unhurried steps. The lantern flickered across his face, showing no surprise, no fear, only a sharpened clarity, as if whatever he had seen had confirmed some grim idea. "The cellar is empty," he announced simply. "Nothing living has been down there, and nothing dead either. Yet something has been moving there, and recently." Hartwell let out a broken sigh of relief. I, however, caught the slight strain in Holmes's voice. Empty did not mean harmless. It meant unoccupied at this moment. And on purpose, Holmes closed the cellar door. This time it did not move on its own. "We return to London," he said. "There is nothing more this house can give us without greater preparation." "Nothing?" I asked, incredulous. After all we've seen?" He looked at the hallway, then the open front door, then the single smooth track in the dusty floorboards. "On the contrary," he murmured, "it has told us that the real stage for this affair is elsewhere. Not here, not in Kent. It lies where all rumors meet. London's throat, its lifeblood, its whispering heart." Hartwell swallowed. "You mean the Strand?" Holmes nodded. "The Strand. We left the estate with an urgency that was not quite haste, for Holmes's steps stayed measured even when the noose of circumstance tightened. The wind had shifted by then. It blew colder, carrying the first smell of coming rain. As our carriage bore us to the station, Holmes stayed silent. Deep in a thought I did not dare interrupt. Hartwell, meanwhile, sat hunched, clutching his hat as if it anchored him to the world. Twice I saw him glance at the envelope in Holmes's pocket, unable to look away for long. The train back to London rattled through the changing afternoon light. The countryside rolled past bare fields, shivering hedges, distant silhouettes of cottages, and gradually gave way to the smudged outskirts of the city. Only once did Holmes speak during the trip. "Watson," he said quietly, "what did you notice when the cellar door opened?" "That it opened without a cause," I replied, "without a hand or a breeze." "Precisely. And when does a door open without outside influence?" "When someone opens it," I said. Holmes's eyes glinted. "Or when someone wants us to believe it opened on its own." Hartwell shivered uncontrollably. "Mr. Holmes, are you saying someone was in that cellar?" "No," Holmes said. "I am saying someone wanted us to believe something was." He did not explain further, and the silence that followed edged toward dread. We reached London by early evening. The city was in one of its restless moods. Carts jostled, vendors shouted their wares. Footsteps clattered in a never-ending rhythm. Yet even in that noise, there was an undertone of unease, as if a rumor had already spread through the air long before we arrived. And indeed, as we walked the Strand, it became clear that whispers had come before us. Two newspaper boys stood on the corner, yelling the latest edition. "Mysterious visitor along the Strand." One shouted, "Reports of a strange man knocking on windows after dark." Hartwell froze. Holmes grabbed a paper, flipped it open, and scanned the front page. I leaned close enough to see the headline: "Unsettling figure seen in Strand District. Residents report late-night knocks and shadowy movement. The article, though short, described an unknown man, or what people thought was a man seen gliding between lampposts, tapping on shutters, and drifting away before residents could fully wake. Some said he left footprints. Others insisted he did not. One woman swore she saw his shadow stretch into the street, far longer than any man's should." Holmes folded the paper with a thoughtful calm, completely unlike Hartwell's rising terror. "They are talking about me," Hartwell rasped. "About the night I ran. They saw me, my shadow. They saw—" Holmes shook his head. "No, Mr. Hartwell, they described not you, but something that followed your path, something that mirrored you, and then went beyond you." The Strand bustled with its usual mix of clerks, errand boys, and the fashionable set strolling under the lamps. Yet beneath that activity ran a second current furtive glances at doorways. Shutters closed earlier than usual, groups of residents talking in low, alarmed voices. Fear, once planted, spreads quickly in a city as dense and impressionable as London. As we walked east, Holmes paused now and then to inspect small details: a scuff on a step, a loose paving stone, a railing polished in one spot by the repeated brush of a hand. Each observation he stored in silence, his mind weaving patterns only he could yet see. We reached a tobacconist's shop near the Adelphi, where a man with a big red beard was sweeping his doorstep with unnecessary force. Holmes spoke to him politely. "Good evening. I understand there have been some troubles here lately." The man looked around nervously before leaning close. "Aye, sir. There's been something moving at night. Something not natural. My wife saw it first. Said it walked past the window without a face to speak of. And when I opened the shop next morning, I found this." He pointed to a mark on the paving stone right under his doorstep. Holmes knelt. The mark looked like no boot print I had ever seen. It was long, thin, and crescent-shaped, as if made by the edge of a curved object dragged slowly across stone. Holmes nodded gravely. "Thank you. You have been very helpful." We moved on. The next two people we asked gave similar stories. Something gliding past their homes in the small hours. Something tall or short, depending on who saw it. Sometimes walking like a man, and sometimes not walking at all. And always they spoke in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting the very subject of their fear to appear behind them. As twilight deepened into evening, the lamps along the Strand began to flicker in their glass cases. Holmes paused under one and stared at it for several long seconds. "Watson," he murmured, "do you remember the small dent on Hartwell's boot?" "Of course." Holmes pointed to the base of the lamppost. There, faint but undeniable, was a similar dent, pressed into the softness of old iron rather than wood or earth. "Whatever followed him," Holmes said, "stopped here. This lamppost was a lookout point." "A lookout point for what?" I asked. "For watching," Holmes replied. The wind rose, the lamps flickered, several went out completely, plunging the pavement into uneven shadow. The Strand, normally bright by evening, looked suddenly older, narrower, as if slipping back into an earlier century. Hartwell trembled. "Mr. Holmes, what do they want from me?" Holmes did not answer right away. He looked at the darkening street, then at the sealed envelope in his pocket. "Not you," he said at last. "Not truly. They want what Pelham left unfinished, and you, Mr. Hartwell, were never meant to survive long enough to bring it to Baker Street." A chill swept down the street, not from the weather, but from the lamps going out one after another, one, then another, then a third. Holmes's eyes followed the pattern. "Watson," he said quietly, "someone is sending us a message." The lamps kept going out one by one, in a deliberate trail leading away from the Strand and into a narrow side alley, a breadcrumb path of darkness. And Holmes, unshaken, stepped forward. "Come," he said. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To the place," Holmes replied, "where rumor becomes truth." He followed the trail of extinguished lamps, and the city, vast, restless, whispering, seemed to follow him. The extinguished lamps formed a corridor of darkness that wound through the Strand. Like a vein under the skin of the city, Holmes walked at its center with a focus so intense that even his usual stride changed. It became quieter, as if he feared disturbing something that listened. Hartwell stayed close beside me, breathing in short, ragged bursts, glancing at every shadow as if each might suddenly detach from the wall. The few people still out gave the unlit stretch a wide berth, muttering to themselves before hurrying away. There is a particular dread that takes hold when a familiar street loses its expected light when the world goes on. But its boundaries become unsure. The darkness led us to a passage so narrow it seemed squeezed by the buildings around it. A sign hung crookedly above the entrance. "Bell Yard." Holmes stopped under it, studying the lamps that had gone out behind us in order. "This is no random failure," he murmured, "nor mischief. Someone wanted to draw us here without facing us directly. Why not face us? I asked. Because, Watson, he said, we are being herded. And shepherds do not strike until their flock is exactly where they want it. Hartwell recoiled as if the word flock applied only to him. Bell Yard was quieter than the Strand, its cobblestones slick from a recent drizzle. The buildings leaned in over the path, their windows shuttered, their doors closed tight as if expecting unwanted company. At its far end stood a small office with a faded sign, * Penning and Row, stationers and legal copyists, * no light shone from within, though the outline of a candle stub glimmered faintly behind the window, as if it had just been put out. Holmes went to the door and tried the handle. It resisted at first, then gave way with a reluctant groan inside. The air smelled of damp ink and paper dust. Stacks of ledgers lined the walls, their spines labeled in neat handwriting, * correspondence, 1881, registry, 1879, transcripts, miscellaneous, *. The place had the deserted feel of an office long unused, though the dust on the counter showed a curious disturbance, a circular patch cleared by a recent object. No bigger than a teacup, Holmes stooped and examined the spot with his magnifying glass. Something was set here only hours ago, he said. Round, heavy, removed with care? A cup? I suggested. He shook his head. No trace of liquid, no mark of a handle. Something metallic. Hartwell hovered in the doorway, refusing to come all the way in. This place? I don't know it. I have never been here. You need not have entered it, Holmes replied, only to have touched the edge of the matter that leads to it. He moved deeper into the office, his eyes scanning the shelves. Finally, he picked a ledger from the top row. Thick, bound in brown leather, its edges worn to a lighter shade. He opened it carefully. I stepped close enough to read over his shoulder. There, in neat columns, were names, dozens of them. Some familiar from London directories, others obscure. Next to each name was a date and a small note. * received, declined, transmitted. Completed * and on a few, barely half a dozen. The same symbol appeared, the snake curled around the key. Holmes tapped the symbol with the tip of his finger. There is our link. Pelham's ledger entries were copied here. Or perhaps these entries were copied for him. Hartwell leaned forward despite himself. Is my name? Is it there? Holmes turned page after page, then stopped at a narrow entry halfway through. Hartwell, Elias, referred. Pending. Hartwell reeled back as if struck. Pending, he whispered. Good God. Pending what? Holmes closed the ledger, his expression tight. Mr. Hartwell, it seems you were not just an observer in Pelham's affairs. You were an intended participant. I never agreed to anything, Hartwell stammered. Holmes looked at him steadily. Precisely, and yet your name is here. Someone expected you to be involved. Now the question is, did Pelham resist that expectation? And was that resistance the cause of his death? A low sound came from the back of the office, a faint shuffling, and the brittle snap of a floorboard. Hartwell nearly collapsed where he stood. Holmes raised a hand for silence. He moved toward the shadowed doorway at the back of the room. I followed, revolver ready. Though my hand was damp on the grip, the back room was smaller, filled with crates of unused paper and tins of ink. At first it seemed empty. Then I saw it, a sheet of paper lying on the floor, perfectly square, perfectly centered, as if placed with deliberate care. On it was a single word, written in a firm, slanted hand. Further, Hartwell's breath caught audibly. It is a message, he whispered, like the paper left at Baker Street. Holmes picked it up. held it to the light, and examined the edges. Cut with a straight blade, not torn, the ink is fresh. Put there within the last hour. Then someone must still be nearby. I exclaimed. No, Holmes said quietly. Someone wanted us to know we are on the right path. But their presence has already faded. He slipped the paper into his pocket. As he did, a gust of wind blew through the office, putting out what little light remained. The front door slammed shut with a violence that knocked Hartwell to his knees. Holmes! I cried, but he had already grabbed his lantern and lit it. The flame sputtered, then steadied. The office had changed. The ledgers were undisturbed, the air unmoved. But the dust on the floor now had a new track along. Smooth mark like the one in Pelam's house, it cut across the floor in a slow arc. Stopping right in front of Holmes, Holmes studied the mark in silence. It is guiding us again, he said. Always forward. Always pulling us further. To where? I asked. Holmes closed the ledger gently. To the one place where ink, secrecy, and authority meet. Scotland Yard? I guessed. He shook his head. No, Watson. Something older. Something more selective. A place our snake and key society has long used for business that needs discretion and reach. He put out the lantern's flame, letting only the street lamp outside the window cast a dim outline across the room. The ledger, he said softly, does not record crimes. It records permissions. Permissions? I repeated. Holmes looked at Hartwell. Pale, shaking, barely able to stand. Yes, Watson. Permissions given to men like Pelham, and permissions denied to men like Hartwell. Doors opened, doors closed. Futures decided without consent. He stepped past us and out into the narrow street. The next door, he said, will not open itself. We will have to force its truth. What door is that? I asked. Holmes paused under a lamp that flickered uncertainly above his head. The one place where London keeps its quietest records? And that is, Holmes turned, cloak stirring in the rising wind. The public offices in Somerset House. A chill went through me. Hartwell staggered, and Holmes, relentless, walked toward the Thames. Wherever the darkness moved, it followed. Wherever the light failed, it seemed to be waiting. We hurried after him, for the city, vast and whispering, had begun to lean in upon us. And the next door, Holmes assured us, would not just open, it would reveal. The Thames that night was a long black muscle under Somerset House, reflecting the washed-out lamplight as if the river itself were a ledger of secrets. We reached the public offices by a path that smelled of damp paper and salt water, Holmes moving with a purpose that steeled him against the strange pressure on the city. Hartwell walked between us, like a man half out of his own skin, his eyes darting at every shadow as if expecting the very ink on the building's front to leap at him. The envelope, the snake, and the key had lain heavy in Holmes's pocket since Kent, and I watched him with close attention as he entered each doorway and nodded to the officers on duty. He did not open it. He held it like someone holds a detonator. Aware of the force it might release if handled carelessly, Somerset House, at that late hour, kept that hush peculiar to institutions devoted to records and registry. The clerks had long since left their ledgers, and the great desks sat empty, their brass fittings catching the light like the eyes of sleeping animals. Yet in some rooms a candle still burned, and a night watchman patrolled with the slow step of someone who measures his minutes by the whisper of paper. Holmes spoke to him in a low, convincing tone, giving a name and a reason as smooth as a key sliding into a lock. The man, after a brief hesitation, led us into a hallway lined with doors whose numbers bore the faint impression of countless fingers. We went to a side room reserved for petitions and older correspondence, a place where, in the daytime, members of Parliament and retired judges once looked for legal precedents and printed laws. It was there, Holmes told me, that certain private entries recorded for silent patrons might be traced. He moved among the stacks like a man reading a familiar face. And soon he found what he was looking for, a boxed file, labeled in a clerk's neat hand with a date matching Pelham's last entries. "Look," Holmes murmured, pulling the file toward the lamp. "This has been looked at recently." The binding showed a fresh impression. The seal, where you would expect a worn crease, was crisp, as if someone had opened it and sealed it again carefully. Holmes lifted the lid with the gentlest motion and drew out a bundle of papers wrapped in coarse linen. Inside were copies of letters, petitions, and at the very heart a single envelope identical to the one in his pocket snake around key. Its wax unbroken, I felt my pulse quicken. In the existence of this folded duplicate, there was a weight that made my fingers itch. Holmes did not break the seal at once. Instead, he laid the two envelopes side by side as if to compare handwriting, pressure, and age. Then, with an economy of movement that would reduce most men to patience, he took a thin sheet from his pocket and placed it under the sealed edge of the original. Rubbing with his thumb, he revealed the faintest impression on the paper, an address, a name, a symbol written in a way that showed discretion rather than secrecy. The ink had bled, the wax had softened, and the impression had left a ghost image on the sheet. Pelham's hand, Holmes concluded. He sent matters through these offices under cover of law. But someone else held the second copy, someone who wanted a backup. A backup for what? Hartwell breathed. For blackmail, for insurance. Or for a final note, Holmes said. An insurance that carried a second seal for a more private audience. We must find the person it was meant for. The clerk, whose job required him to stay indifferent, had a face that showed a flicker of curiosity as we cross-referenced numbers and dates. He brought out a ledger in which the removal of the file had been noted and signed. The signature, at first glance, was a curling code, but Holmes, with a patience I have seen him use before, traced the flourish and, by the play of light, found under it a set of initials faintly worn by repeated handling. "L.V.," he whispered. The initials startled me. They were common enough. Yet Holmes's tone implied that their commonness had a particular importance. Lady Ventress? I suggested, thinking of a name I'd once seen in a society column. Holmes nodded slowly. Possibly, or some other lady with the same initials. The aristocracy loves its veils, but who would have needed Pelham's secrecy so badly as to keep a second copy in these offices? And to whom would he have given the key? Hartwell's hands went cold in his lap. Pelham. He had clients. Families who feared scandal more than the law. Holmes's gaze hardened. Families who fear scandal yet command men to guard it. And men who bind those with knowledge, using threats and promises alike. We examined the duplicate envelope more closely. This one had inside the seal a line of faint letters only the most careful inspection could show. Holmes tilted it to the light and read aloud, the words sounding like a verdict. Asterisk for private use only. Delivered to the housekeeper once received by an agent bearing the seal. Should the key be taken, do not allow its bearer to cross the river. Asterisk. Hartwell's face twisted with confusion and dread. The housekeeper. They mean to hide it among the servants. But why the river? Why forbid crossing? Holmes put his fingertips together. The river is a boundary, Watson. A physical separation from certain records and the authority they represent. To forbid crossing the Thames is to forbid the matter from leaving the old county's reach. It is a rule for containment. Containment of what? Hartwell asked, his voice thin. Holmes did not answer. Instead, he fixed his attention on the clerk, whose eyes had grown wider with each discovery. The man had a name, Mr. Fenton, and a face freckled by lamp smoke. Holmes questioned him until he revealed, with an officious irritation, the name of a house in the West End, where agents of several families left their correspondence. It was a place known to those who move in society's quieter hallways as an informal clearinghouse, a boarding house for confidences, where ladies, maids, and housekeepers moved with as much discretion as the gentry themselves. Holmes smiled without warmth. "We go there," he said, and folded the duplicate envelope into his coat. We arrived at the boarding house as the fog began to thicken. The gaslight choked into soft halos. The house itself was modest, its door plain and unnoticeable. A common place to hide uncommon things. A servant let us in with a reluctance bordering on fear, saying that orders from upstairs were to receive no visitors after dark. Holmes, unmoved, showed the credentials of a gentleman with a stake in private records, and used a tone that made resistance useless. We were taken to a sitting room on the first floor, dim with candlelight, where the housekeeper, a woman of respectable age with a face seasoned by secrets, sat knitting. Dismissing the world, Holmes studied her quietly, like someone studying a ledger for its margin notes. "Madam," he said, "I understand you sometimes accept items for safekeeping." Her knitting paused, her fingers still. "We do," she answered, her voice a low thread of habit. "From ladies who travel, from gentlemen who cannot trust their peers. I wonder, then," Holmes continued, "if you can tell me about an envelope sealed with a snake and a key, last seen this afternoon and marked for private delivery." Her eyes flicked to where Hartwell sat, then to Holmes's face. For a moment I thought she would deny all knowledge and send us away. "Such things pass through many hands," she said at last. "They pass like whispers, but they sometimes leave a trace." She stood, set the knitting aside, and led us to a small storeroom at the back. It smelled of starch, lavender, and the faint metallic tang of old pins. Shelves lined the wall, and on one of them, behind a row of hat boxes, lay a small bundle wrapped in linen. Holmes took it with the delicacy of a man handling a holy object. The envelope inside felt heavier in its solitude. He held it with both hands, respectful and alert, as if it might bite. "Who put it here?" he asked. The housekeeper looked at him with a softness that carried an age-old weariness. "A man came for it tonight," she said. "He did not give his name. He paid with coins and left instructions to keep it until morning. He asked that no one cross the river with it." Hartwell made a sound like a sob caught in a doorway. "He asked that no one cross the river. Who was he?" The woman gave a small shrug. "A stranger. I only know what he left." Holmes paid, not from fear, but from the calculation that instantly turned in his mind. "And did you deliver it?" "No," she answered. "I was told to hold it. But he gave me." She fumbled at her apron and pulled out a small scrap of paper, folded 3 times. This was pinned under the bundle. Holmes unfolded it with the care of a man opening a sealed will. On it was written a single instruction in a hand that might have been ironed, smooth by many such commands. Asterisk if he reaches London with the key. Tear the paper and burn the ledger. Asterisk the air in the room seemed to thicken into a press. For a moment, none of us spoke. Outside, the fog pushed at the window panes as if listening. Holmes folded the scrap into his pocket and glanced once more at Hartwell. "You were never meant to carry this to Baker Street," he said. "You are a temporary holder, a carrier. Someone intended your journey to stop before the river." Hartwell's head bowed. Then why did they let me reach you?" Holmes looked at him with a pity that was almost savage in its honesty. "Because, Mr. Hartwell, there are times when a plan needs a loose end to burn. And sometimes that loose end does not catch fire as expected." He stood and placed the snake and key envelope on the table. "We must open it." Hartwell flinched as if the act were a trespass against fate. Holmes's hand hovered over the seal as if feeling for a pulse. "No rush," he said, "but no delay either. Outside, the fog seemed to thicken into a muffled ocean. In the dim room, the envelope lay between us, like a sleeping thing about to wake. Holmes broke the seal with a small, precise movement and pulled out a single sheet folded into quarters. He unfolded it slowly, as if the letters might come off and vanish if exposed to the light too quickly. On it was written, in a careful and deliberate hand, words that reached beyond the immediate into the plan itself. Asterisk, deliver the key to no man who fears the river. Asterisk, asterisk, if the ledger burns, remember the list must live elsewhere. Asterisk under that instruction, in a hurried script, someone had added 4 names and a place, the name of a club I knew by reputation. A billiard room used by certain gentlemen of law and leisure, and an address near the river, but on the north bank. Holmes folded the paper back into its envelope and looked toward the window, beyond which the night breathed upon Somerset House. "They hide their ledger here," he said finally, his voice low as a bell. "But they keep a copy outside the reach of law. A private list that outlives paper." Hartwell closed his eyes. "So they planned for the ledger to burn," Holmes nodded, "and for a key to vanish." He stood and tapped the window with a long, thin finger. The fog had curled like a hand around the street below. "We must find the ledger's other home," he said, "and we must learn whether Pelham resisted, or whether he was removed because he resisted." He folded the envelopes with a slow, resolute motion and put them back in his pocket. The housekeeper watched him with an expression that spoke of too many held confidences. "Be careful," she said. "Those who keep secrets do not give them up lightly." Holmes inclined his head. "Neither do those who seek them," he agreed. We left into the night, the fog swallowing our footsteps, as if the city itself conspired to hide our path. Hartwell walked between us, more numb than fearful now, the knowledge that he had been used settling on him like a second skin. Holmes tucked both the envelope and the scrap inside his coat. "To the club, perhaps," he mused aloud, "or to the billiard room. Men keep their lists where they play, where their leisure ensures continued discretion. We will start there." As we made our way back through the fog toward Baker Street, the river at our side flowed with an unbothered patience, indifferent to the human plans that tried to bind it. Overhead, a bell tolled the hour, its note lost in the wet air. Holmes walked steadily, his figure a dark line against the lighter mist, as if he himself were part of a story, moving from sentence to sentence. Behind us, the housekeeper drew the curtain and returned to her knitting, and for a moment the world of silent keeping closed again, only to be reopened by the rustle of paper in Holmes's pocket and by the decision we had already made. London at night has a heartbeat different from the day's, and on that evening it pulsed with a tension that seemed to thrum under the paving stones. A fog of unusual density hung low, not the ordinary river mist, but something heavier, as if the city had exhaled slowly and refused to inhale again. Holmes set a quick pace along the embankment, hardly speaking, his eyes fixed on some inner compass that guided him as surely as any map. Hartwell trailed close at his shoulder, pale and feverish, while I stayed alert to every shifting shadow, every flicker behind the lamps. the club named in the envelope's last line, the one near the river where certain gentlemen played billiards and conducted their quieter business, lay in a narrow dead-end street off Villers Street, a polished brass sign, modest to the point of secrecy, bore the words, "The Alabaster Rooms." Its door was discreet, its windows veiled, its lamps steady. Yet as we approached, I noticed something odd. Each lamp along the street dimmed slightly as we neared, as if their light weakened not from failing gas, but from some atmospheric force that came with us. Holmes noticed it too, for he lifted his head slightly and murmured, "Notice the pattern, Watson, a fade in order." "Not all at once, like the lights along the Strand," I replied. "Yes, only now they announce not a warning, but an arrival." Hartwell shuddered violently. "Is it here?" Holmes gave no answer. He knocked on the door with the crisp authority of an expected guest. A butler opened it, a thin man with a face like unyielding parchment. His eyes swept over us with cool recognition. "You are expected," he said quietly. "This way, expected." Hartwell nearly staggered. I steadied him with a hand. We entered a hallway lit by soft lamps and carpeted in deep red. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and varnished oak. Beyond the hall was a long room with green felt tables lined up, cues on their racks, and ashtrays gleaming in the shadows. Only a few gentlemen remained at that late hour, each focused intently on his game or newspaper, none acknowledging us. Yet I sensed they had already measured us with the sideways glance of the well-trained observer. The butler led us to a private parlor at the back. Inside sat a man of about 50, dressed in sober black with a high collar. His hair brushed meticulously back from his temples. His expression was unreadable, yet his hands long, sinewy, and still spoke of someone used to precision. "You carry something that belongs to us," he said without introduction. Letting his gaze rest on Holmes, Holmes produced no envelope. Instead, he sat opposite the man with an ease that hid the tension in the room. "We carry what Mr. Pelham left unfinished," he replied. "What he may have died for." The man's eyelids lowered just enough to show recognition. "Pelham was not meant to die," he said, "but he let fear overcome duty. And fear has a price." Hartwell stepped back instinctively. Holmes motioned for him to stay still. "You refer," Holmes said, "to the key he kept, and to the ledger of names." "The ledger," the man said softly, "is only a record, a list of those trusted to handle matters beyond the ordinary reach of law. Pelham held the key, yes, but he began to waver. He feared the consequences of holding what he barely understood. And Hartwell? Holmes asked, "Why was his name put on your list?" The man's calm expression did not change. "Because Pelham named him." Hartwell pressed his fists to his temples. "I never agreed to anything. I was a clerk. I copied letters. I did nothing more." "You misunderstand," the man replied. "Agreement is not always needed to be useful. Your mind, Mr. Hartwell, has a peculiarly orderly way of working." Pelham noted it. "He meant you to be his replacement." Hartwell made a strangled sound. "Replacement in what?" The man ignored him. He fixed his attention on Holmes. "You have seen the duplicate envelope. You know the key was to be given to no man who fears the river. This is because the river marks the limit of our authority. What lies north of it belongs to entirely different interests." Holmes's voice sharpened. "And what lies south? What power demands such secrecy?" The man did not blink. "Order." "Whose order?" Holmes asked. "The order that prevents disorder," he replied, which was no answer at all. At that moment, the lamps flickered not gradually as before, but violently, As if some force had struck the gas lines themselves, the flame stretched unnaturally long, then shrank to a trembling bead. The butler turned abruptly, alarm crossing his stoic face. Then the first lamp went out. Then the next. Within seconds, the whole club plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the embers in the fireplace. Hartwell grabbed my arm in terror. The man in black stood without rising. As if he expected this, Holmes, calm as the eye of a storm, struck a match and lit a single candle. Its flame wavered like a frightened creature. "Stay still," he whispered. A sound moved through the club, a soft sliding noise, neither footsteps nor breeze. It passed under the door, along the carpet. Like a weight dragged over velvet, the air grew cold. Even the candle flame bent sideways, as if recoiling. Hartwell clutched at his throat. "It followed me, dear God, Mr. Holmes. It followed me here." "No," Holmes said quietly. "It followed the key." The noise grew deeper, still soft, but unmistakably closer. Something brushed the underside of the door, a whisper of contact, like cloth drawn gently across wood. The man in black breathed in sharply, and for the first time his composure cracked. "They should not have found us," he whispered. The doorknob turned, not quickly, slowly, deliberately. Holmes blew out the candle. What followed was a darkness so complete it pressed on the eyes like cloth. The door creaked inward, not flung open, not pushed. It simply yielded. A faint glow from the hall seeped into the room. Not lamplight, but something dimmer, more spread out, as if light itself hesitated to go with whatever approached. Holmes's voice, when it came, was barely a breath. "Watson, move the others behind me." I obeyed. Though I felt as exposed as Hartwell, the man in black backed away, his breathing rapid and shallow. Then something crossed the threshold. Not a figure, not a shadow. The absence of both, a distortion of the air, bending the faint glow around it, as if a shape moved without letting light describe it. The carpet pressed down under an invisible weight, smoothly, evenly, as if something gliding rather than stepping had entered the room. Hartwell whimpered, "It wants me, it wants me." Holmes held out a hand. Not toward Hartwell, toward the distortion. "Enough," he said, his voice abrupt, sharp, commanding in a way I'd rarely heard. "You have your ledger. You have your agents. But this man is no longer part of your design. I will not allow it." The distortion stopped. Holmes reached slowly into his coat and pulled out the snake and key envelope. "Take what you came for," he said, "and leave." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the envelope stiffened in Holmes's grip, not from wind, not from Holmes's hand from a force pulling on it. He let it go. The envelope floated upward, hanging in the air, unsupported, then vanished into the darkness beyond the doorway. The air pressure shifted, the distortion withdrew. The door closed itself with a soft click. The lamps were lit, embers brightened. The room restored itself in a single shared breath. Hartwell collapsed to the carpet. The man in black sat heavily in his chair. Trembling, Holmes alone remained standing. Though even he looked momentarily drained. What was it? I whispered. Holmes breathed out slowly. "Not a ghost, Watson, nor an apparition. A tool of influence, a force aimed at fear. They have used it to steer men before. But how?" "What?" Holmes shook his head. "Not yet. We are not ready for the truth behind it." He knelt beside Hartwell. "It is over," he murmured. "For now, you will not be followed tonight." The man in black looked up, his voice shaking. "You should not interfere, Mr. Holmes. There are matters older than your investigations." Holmes's expression hardened. And there are men older than your secrets. I will learn the truth of Pelham's death and what part you played in it. He stood, his cloak gathering around him like a storm. Come, Watson, he said. This night is not done. We must follow where the ledger leads next. We left the alabaster rooms. Outside, the fog parted like a curtain drawn aside for our passage. The lamps along the street burned bright once more. But the river was darker than ever. And on its surface, for the briefest moment, I saw something tall and shapeless gliding along the waterline. Silent, patient, as if waiting for whatever came next. Holmes saw it too. He did not stop. He only whispered as we walked, "The next door, Watson, will be the most closely guarded of all." Dawn found London in a colorless hush, the sunlight struggling through a haze that dulled every outline of the city. Yet Holmes, who had not slept a moment since our encounter at the alabaster rooms, strode through Baker Street with the alertness of a man on whom fatigue makes no claim. Hartwell, weaker but steadier than before, stayed close at hand, and I followed Holmes with a growing unease that the case had begun to stretch beyond its original purpose into some wider, deeper territory. There was an unmistakable change in Holmes's manner. His usual precision had sharpened into something cold and absolute, as if the events of the night had stripped away any patience he had for uncertainty. He worked through the early hours with rapid, clipped movements, sorting through the evidence gathered so far, the ledger entries, the duplicate envelope, Pelham's imprinted confession, the final instruction from the Snake and Key Society. All these he arranged and rearranged on the sitting-room table until a pattern began to emerge. One only he could see, when at last he straightened. There was an expression on his face I had seen only in those rarest cases where the stakes went beyond mere crime. "Watson," he said, "the society whose mark we have traced from Kent to London does not operate from the shadows just for secrecy. They operate from the shadows because their authority is not approved by any law known to Parliament. They are an institution older than offices, older than files, older even than certain departments in Whitehall. And they work not through official channels, but through doors." "Doors?" I repeated. Holmes tapped the ledger. "Doors that lead to information, not rooms. Doors that open when a name is written and close when a task is finished. Doors that let in only those given access and push out those who falter." Pelham began to falter. Hartwell was picked to replace him. Hartwell covered his face with both hands. "I never wanted any part of this." "That," Holmes said gravely, "may be the very reason you were chosen." He turned his gaze to the map he had spread on the table. Red pencil marked 3 separate points on the north bank of the Thames. One was circled with precision. "Here," he said, tapping the map, "Kingsway Administrative Annex. A government building in name, but not in practice. Officially used for archive overflow, rarely visited, largely forgotten. Yet the building plans show a basement with no corridors leading to it. A room with a door drawn, but never labeled. It appears in the blueprints, but there is no stair, no passage, no way in." Hartwell looked up sharply. "A room with no entrance. A room," Holmes murmured, "meant only for those who know how to reach it." I felt a quiet dread gather behind my breastbone. "You believe this room is linked to Pelham?" Holmes nodded. "He worked for them. He held their key. He grew afraid, my suspicion indeed. My near certainty is that his final task involved something in that room, something he was supposed to do but could not reconcile with his conscience." "And we are to go there?" I asked. "We must," Holmes answered. "For whatever killed Pelham, whatever followed Hartwell, must have started in the one place neither law nor daylight reaches, Hartwell trembled. "But how can we enter a room that has no door?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Because, Mr. Hartwell, the door exists. It is just not meant to be found by ordinary men." The Kingsway annex rose from the fog like a tomb of forgotten paperwork gray stone. Narrow windows, a front that declared bureaucratic purpose without inviting inspection. Few people passed on the street at that hour. Those who did carried stacks of folders or simply hurried by, unwilling to linger before a government building with so little public presence. Holmes led us around the back of the structure to a rusted service entrance. He knocked once softly, and the door opened the width of a finger. A man stood inside, thinner than hunger, his face lined with a clerk's exhaustion. He did not speak. He just stared at Holmes with the blankness of one used to taking orders from invisible superiors. Holmes nodded. "We seek access to the old basement section." The man's eyes shifted to Hartwell with an intensity bordering on recognition. He stepped aside without a word, letting us enter. The inside corridors were long, narrow, and cluttered with bundles of obsolete papers tied with string. Dust lay on the floor like a second surface, disturbed only by the occasional track of a trolley. The clerk guided us down a hall with ceilings too low for comfort and walls too thin to promise silence. Doors lined the passage, some locked, some ajar, each labeled with a number that seemed unrelated to any sensible system. Finally, the clerk stopped before a blank stretch of wall. "Here?" Holmes asked. The man nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Holmes crouched, pressing his fingers to the wall surface. "There is an outline," he said quietly. "Faint, but there." I saw it then, a subtle frame flush with the plaster. Nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. No handle, no hinges, no keyhole. Holmes stood and spoke to the clerk. "How is it opened?" The clerk's lips parted. For a moment I thought he might speak, but he only glanced at Hartwell again. Holmes followed that look. "Mr. Hartwell," he said. "Step forward," Hartwell recoiled. "No, no, I cannot." But Holmes took him gently by the arm and guided him toward the wall. The moment Hartwell stood before it, something extraordinary happened. A breath of cold air leaked from the invisible seams. The dust on the floor stirred, the wall, solid, immovable, shivered not visibly, but audibly. A low vibration pulsed through the plaster, as if the building itself recognized a returning occupant. Hartwell stumbled back in terror, but Holmes steadied him. "It responds to you," Holmes whispered, "or to something Pelham left in your care." Then the outline deepened. Lines that had been invisible thickened into grooves. The face of the wall bulged outward, forming a slight curve like a ripple under a sheet. And with a sound like stone releasing its breath, the door revealed itself. No hinges swung, no latch clicked, the wall simply parted, dividing along a seam that had never been drawn on any plan. And folded inward, a doorway now stood before us. Beyond it, stairs descended into absolute blackness. The clerk, having done his unspoken duty, slipped away without a word, leaving us alone with the newly opened entrance. Hartwell clutched at his coat. "Mr. Holmes, please." "We must not go down there." Holmes lit his lantern. "It is precisely because we must not," he said, "that we shall." He stepped onto the first stair. The lantern's glow reached perhaps 2 steps down before it was swallowed whole. "Watson," he said. I followed without hesitation Hartwell. After a tremor went through him, came too. The stairs curved sharply, the air growing colder with each step down, the walls narrowed, pressing in, forming a throat that seemed determined to choke the passage of light. The silence deepened. It became a weight on the eardrums. At the bottom of the stairs, we found a chamber made not for work, nor for record-keeping, nor for any administrative purpose, but for something far stranger. The room was six-sided, its walls lined with shelves not of paper, but of keys, hundreds, maybe thousands of keys, some brass, some steel, some blackened with age, each hanging from a small hook under a name written in elegant script. Names I recognized, names from the ledger, names from the envelopes, names crossed out. Holmes's face tightened as he lifted one key, Pallen's key, from its hook. Where it should have been sat in empty space, Hartwell swayed. I don't understand. Holmes turned slowly toward the center of the chamber. There, on a pedestal, lay a book bound in dark leather. The ledger, not the public one, not the copy, but the original. Holmes breathed in sharply. But before he could reach for it, a sound rose behind us. A slow, smooth movement, not from the stairs, but from the doorway. I turned. The door, if it could be called a door, was closing. Not quickly, not violently, but with quiet, deliberate intent, as if we had entered a place that allowed movement in only one direction. Down, not out. The last sliver of light from the hall narrowed, then vanished. The chamber sealed itself. Holmes raised the lantern. Watson, he said softly, we have found the truth. Shadows deepened between the shelves. Something moved among them. Not seen, not heard, but present, waiting. The ledger on the pedestal fluttered its pages without the touch of any wind. The air in the sealed chamber shifted with a slow, almost deliberate awareness, as if the room itself had been holding its breath for years and now exhaled at the arrival of intruders. Holmes lifted the lantern higher, casting a trembling circle of light that grazed the shelves of keys and the single pedestal in the center. Hartwell stood between us, clutching at nothing, his breathing shallow, his face drained of blood. I could not blame him. The walls seemed to close in on us, not physically, but in feeling, as if the space shrank in response to our presence. Holmes approached the pedestal with a composure that did not fool me. His shoulders were slightly squared, his step a fraction slower than usual. The ledger, lying on the dark leather surface, looked older than the copies we had seen, its edges frayed, its spine cracked from frequent handling. But it was the fluttering of its pages, rising and falling in a faint rhythm, that most unsettled the air. No draft, Holmes murmured. No current, and yet it moves. Mr. Holmes, Hartwell whispered, please, please let us leave this place. Holmes cast a quick glance at the sealed door. I assure you, Mr. Hartwell, if I knew how to open that wall again, I would consider the matter. For now, we must understand why it has closed. He reached for the ledger. The instant his fingers touched the leather, the pages stopped moving. Holmes did not pull back. Instead, he opened the book to the first page. The names began in neat alphabetical order, some familiar, many unknown. Some were marked with the snake and key symbol, others with a slash, still others left blank. A faint film of dust clung to the entries, disturbed only where recent fingers had traced lines. What is this place? I asked quietly. Holmes turned the page. A registry not of crimes or of officials, but of bearers, men entrusted with tasks for which ordinary channels were not enough. Each key matches a person's duty. When a bearer fails, dies, or avoids responsibility, their key is removed. I scanned the shelves. Many keys were missing. Many hooks sat empty. Holmes's voice dropped. This place is the heart of their operations, the center of all they have kept hidden, a vault not of gold, but of obedience. And Pilum, Holmes stopped at an entry marked in faded ink. Asterisk Pelham, Lawrence. Key revoked. Replacement initiated. Asterisk Holmes pointed there, and beneath it, I read the name aloud in disbelief. Asterisk Hartwell, Elias, awaiting confirmation. Asterisk Hartwell jerked back as if struck. I never sought any of this. I knew nothing of it. Holmes put a steadying hand on his shoulder. And yet you were chosen. Pelham must have named you. Whether in desperation or by design, we must find out. He turned another page and stopped. The next entry had been written in a different hand. Smaller and tighter, it read, asterisk if the bearer refuses. The chamber will compel his successor. Asterisk Holmes's expression hardened. Compel, he repeated. An extraordinary word. This society does not just record its bearers. It shapes them. A faint sound stirred behind us. A soft scrape like stone shifting against stone. I turned sharply, between two shelves. Something slid closer. Not a figure, not a shadow. A distortion like the bending of heat above a flame. But cold, so cold that the lantern's warmth faltered. The light stretched, twisted, then straightened again as if afraid to stay too near. Holmes did not retreat. You do not wish us dead, he said quietly. If you did, we would already be gone. You wish to make sure the ledger stays intact. You wish to enforce its order. The distortion trembled, as if acknowledging the words. Holmes stepped forward a pace, not recklessly, but with an audacity born of absolute clarity. But Pelham resisted you. He faltered. And Hartwell escaped you. Your tool of fear failed him. That is why you followed him across the river, why you entered London, why you appeared at every door he knocked on. The distortion shrank, then expanded slowly, deliberately. Hartwell cried out. But Holmes raised a hand for silence. Watson, he said without turning, look at the shelf directly behind you. Tell me if there is a key missing. I did as asked. My hand shook as I read the names above each hook. Then I found it. Asterisk Hartwell, Elias, key absent. Asterisk Holmes nodded. There. Pelham must have removed your key before he died. He hid it, perhaps inside the envelope we found. Perhaps somewhere else. And without the key, the chamber could not compel you. You became an irregularity. A bearer without a binding. Hartwell stared at the shells in horror. So it hunted me because of what I lacked, or what you refused, Holmes said softly. The distortion surged forward suddenly, not with violence, but with enough force to put out the lantern's flame. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Hartwell clung to my coat. Holmes stood rigidly still. His breathing measured. When the light returned, this time not from any lantern, but from the faint glow that came from the ledger's pages. We saw something written where there had been only emptiness before. A new entry. Asterisk Hartwell. Elias. Final decision required. Asterisk Holmes breathed out. This chamber demands that its accounts be settled. It will not let us go until the ledger balances. Hartwell stumbled back. No, no. I will not take the key. I will not be part of this. Holmes's gaze soft, not in sympathy, but in deep respect. Then you do not understand, Hartwell. The choice is not whether you join them. The choice is whether you return to your life free, or become lost in the shadows that have been following you. But how can I choose? Holmes lifted the ledger, because this chamber responds to fear. It responds to weakness, but it also responds to resolve. Pelham was undone by indecision. You must be the opposite. He pointed to the empty hook. Walk to it, he said. Hartwell shook violently. What if the chamber seals me inside? What if I become? Holmes cut him off. Mr. Hartwell, I will not let harm come to you. Watson is here. I am here. Trust, if nothing else. The proof that fear has dragged you far enough. Hartwell's breath trembled between his teeth. Then, with visible effort, he stepped toward the shelf. The distortion hissed. The walls trembled. The ledger's glow brightened. Holmes called out sharply, "Do not falter now." Hartwell reached the hook. He placed his hand on the empty metal. A resonance passed through the chamber, a vibration deep enough to rattle the shelves, to make the very keys hum against their hooks. The distortion convulsed, as if recoiling from contact with something it could not control. Then a faint clatter sounded behind the pedestal. Holmes moved swiftly, picking up a brass object from the floor. It was a key, Pelham's missing key. The chamber grew still. Holmes placed the key on the empty hook. The name beneath it glowed once, then dimmed. Hartwell collapsed to his knees. Sobbing in exhausted relief, the distortion dissolved. Not dispersed, dissolved, as if relieved of its purpose. Holmes put the ledger back on the pedestal. The pages fluttered once more, this time settling into stillness, like a completed breath. Then the wall behind us shuddered. A line of light split the stone. The door opened. Holmes helped Hartwell to his feet. "It is done," he murmured. "The chamber has accepted Pelham's end, and your refusal to take his burden." We climbed the stairs in silence, emerging into the hallway just as the clerk vanished around a corner without a trace. Outside, the morning had brightened. London breathed again. Hartwell stood under the pale sunlight, trembling not from fear, but from a newfound lightness. "Mr. Holmes," he whispered, "thank you for freeing me." Holmes shook his head. "No. You freed yourself the moment you chose courage over compulsion." He turned to me, coat swirling in the waking breeze. "Come, Watson, we have much to record, and more still to forget." Hartwell walked back toward the river, facing the morning with a steadiness I had not seen in him before. As Holmes and I walked away, he spoke quietly. "There are cases, Watson, where justice is not found in the courts or in the public record. Some truths belong to doors that close themselves once the right man walks through them." He paused. "And some doors, thankfully, never open again." We moved on through the bustling streets. Behind us, the river flowed dark and unconcerned, as if the night's mysteries had never stirred upon its surface. But I felt even then the faintest tremor beneath the city's heartbeat. The chamber slept for now, but London never truly sleeps.